Good morning. My name is Reg Boland, and I am a member here of St. Luke's Episcopal Church, Salisbury, North Carolina. It is a pleasure to give you a bit of a tour today and to tell you some of the interesting stories related to this very old, very historic, and very, very alive and active parish here in the town of Salisbury. So that's what this looks like today. But what I'd like for you to do is imagine that in the 1700s and for centuries before, this place and all around it was a wilderness full of brambles, woods, and Native Americans, and nothing else. But then finally, the tide of history caught up with this area as settlers moved from the coast inward, inexorably carving out farmsteads, homesteads for themselves, and slowly but surely pushing the Native Americans westward and out of the way. It was named Rowan County after Governor Rowan, and the town was to be called Salisbury, and the Church of England parish was to be called St. Luke's Church. Wherever the Crown of England went, so went the Church of England. So whenever a Crown colony established a jurisdictional seat, it also established a Church of England parish. Now here, that was quite a difficult thing to accomplish. The early settlers were primarily Presbyterians, Scotch-Irish, German Lutherans, or unchurched folk, and they did not take kindly to the idea of being taxed to support the established church. Then imagine the Revolutionary War as it swept through the area as well. Remember, in the Revolution, there were really two groups. One group, the revolutionaries, who wanted to carve out a new nation. They wanted to kick England out of the picture, thank you, and the English taxes. Others were loyalists. They said, no, we are England, we are part of England, we want to remain England. Quite often, loyalists were also members of the Church of England, needless to say. So those two groups during the Revolutionary War were very uncomfortable with one another here. There was animosity, probably even some bloodshed. Then if you can imagine, George Washington in 1791, on what was referred to as his Southern tour, came through Salisbury. So yes, indeed, George did sleep here. Now if you fast forward to the years leading up to the Civil War, the animosity, the arguments, the split families, about the idea of secession from the Union and being aligned with the Confederacy or remaining with the Union. And so this was a difficult time, a hard time as the South deteriorated through the war. Lives here were lost. It was a difficult and ugly time. In addition, there was a Confederate prison here that housed Union troops, and it was notorious. There was little food for the populace, much less for the prisoners, so it was a notoriously terrible place. The Hall House here in town belonged to Dr. Josephus Hall. He was a member of this congregation and also was the chief surgeon at the Union Confederate prison. There is some evidence that during winter months, they removed the furnishings out of this building, the 1828 portion of it, and it may have been used to function as a hospital for some of the Union troops as well as Confederate troops. We can't absolutely guarantee that's correct, but there's a bit of evidence toward that. So the post-Civil War Reconstruction period was also rather difficult. Everyone was pretty much impoverished. Sherman had his General Stoneman march through Salisbury, and much of the city had been burned to the ground during Stoneman's raid. So life was pretty tough, but slowly but surely things did more or less return to what we might call normal. But then more history swept through: World War I, Great Depression, World War II, etc. So the parish, the family of St. Luke's, have always been steadfastly involved in the community, caring for one another and caring for others, heavily involved in the political, social, educational, and business lives of Salisbury, Rowan. The history of St. Luke's is inseparable from the political and social history of Salisbury and Rowan County. Now let's talk about the evolution of the grand old church building. We're standing in the original section, which we would refer to as the nave. The original building, once again, 1828, and it actually ended where you see the great arch. That was a solid wall. There was an altar table against that wall. Looking back this way, there was a door at the end of this aisle that basically faced Main Street, Salisbury. Above it was a gallery. Now that could be referred to as a servant's gallery, or perhaps even slave gallery. The household servants would often accompany their families to church and would sit in the gallery with the children. Now that has long since gone. So some definitions from our Old English heritage. The sanctuary is actually only the portion of the building that contains the high altar. Is considered the Holy of Holies in the building. And so the sanctuary in this case was added in that 1882 edition behind me. Now it didn't look like this. What you see here is a change that came later, which I will explain. This area, once again referred to as the nave, this is where the people sat. That comes from the old Latin term novice, where the word navy comes from. The idea being that the people are sitting in a ship. It happens to be inverted, so they're like sailing through the heavens. And then you had another section referred to as the choir. Now in the ancient church, the choir did not consist of members of the congregation. The choir were usually brothers or sisters in the monasteries attached to the churches. So in 1882, this major addition of the formal sanctuary on that end of the church was added, and the first stained glass windows in this area of the state were installed above the altar table, which was there. Now the locals made quite a to-do about that. The local newspaper published a big article about the fact that this gorgeous stained glass window had been installed all the way from New York. Once again, this was 1882. Now in a subsequent edition, which I'll talk about shortly, 1909, that window was moved to the location you see here. This is called the Good Shepherd window. It's Christ the Good Shepherd, and he is with two of the gospel writers. The other two windows that accompany that are still on either side of the sanctuary. They're beautiful windows made by Colgate Company of New York. Now, one interesting thing about this window is typically in Christian iconography, the only one of the four gospel writers pictured without a beard is St. John, because he was the youngest. So the other three have beards. Also, typically, St. John is pictured on Christ's right hand because he was considered the beloved disciple. But if you notice here, St. John without the beard is on Christ's left hand. St. Luke is on Christ's right hand. Now, my own personal interpretation of that is, if you're paying the bill, if you're writing the check, and your patron is St. Luke, you can certainly have him on Christ's right hand of honor if you choose to do so. In the late 1800s, the rector here was Francis Johnstone Murdoch. He was here for 37 years. He was quite a dynamo locally in every way. He was a businessman, a clergyman, an educator, and he grew the parish substantially. So while he was here, additional stained glass was added. For instance, the 3 windows on this side were in the 1890s, and they depict interesting people: St. William of York, St. Woolston, Eli, St. Augustine, St. Aidan. Interesting people you may never have heard of. Now, why would they pick rather peculiar saints? Well, these were English saints to a great extent. Father Murdoch probably had a major impact. So if I had come to Father Murdoch and said, I would love to donate a new stained glass window to the church, he more than likely would have said, I think St. Woolston would be a great person to honor with a window. So we believe that it was his influence that led to some rather interesting folk that you typically don't hear about. If you ever have a chance to read the lives of some of these saints, they're pretty incredible. Each one would make for a wonderful, wonderful movie. So these 3 windows were next. Then on this side, a few years later, 2 more windows. Once again, interesting people: St. Alphege, St. Hilda, and then David and Mary, the Mother of God. Now, there never was a 3rd window where you see the organ chamber. There was originally the mullioned window, but when these were added at the same time, they took that out and extended the building for an organ chamber. And that's where the organ chamber has been ever since the late 1800s. Now, originally, there was an organ in the old gallery that would have been above my head right here. That came in the early 1800s. It was the first organ in the city of Salisbury. It moved around 2 or 3 times, and then later, when the gallery was taken down, they built the chamber. In that chamber, since that time, there have now been 4 different instruments. The one you see there now is a recent addition, a magnificent instrument that we are very, very pleased with. What was the next step? 1909 and 1910. Father Murdoch had been here many years. Once again, at that point, the church was booming, and there was a real need to expand the church, and so they began the process to do so. So, 1909, 1910, they took the wall out here, removed the gallery, so the front door disappeared from being right about here. They expanded or extended the nave back to the great Ascension window which you see. On the right, where that Good Shepherd window we just looked at became the baptistry. On the left, to my left, the entrance to the building, the narthex, with the great tower above it. Now the big tower above that, which was you saw that from the outside, is modeled after Magdalen Tower of Oxford, England. It contains a ring of 4 Dutch bells and has been chiming out over the city of Salisbury for many, many years there. So what happened here, the ladies of the church, once again, who had always been the primary folks who raised the money to do improvements to the church, they had lost Father Murdoch. He died before these additions were completed. He had been greatly loved, and so in his memory, the ladies of the church donated monies so that the lovely carved reredos, that's R-E-R-E-D-O-S, that's the carved woodwork behind the altar, was added. And then above it, the round Madonna window. Now this particular window is an interesting one. It's by Raphael, and it's an image that you may see in lots of places. I've bought Christmas cards, for instance, that have this image. It's interesting in that they would select that. I guess it fit nicely above that carved reredos. It's my favorite window in the building because, well, a couple reasons. Number one, interestingly, if you see 3 individuals with Mary, so in other words, if Mary is pictured with the Christ child and a 3rd individual, and that 3rd individual is not an adult, that is always St. John the Baptist. So in other words, this is Christ and his cousin, John, with Mary. And once again, that's a pretty typical image that you would see. This is called the Madonna of the Chair. If you look carefully you'll see that she is sitting in a very ornate chair. It looks like something that would have been in a Renaissance era palace in Italy. Certainly not in Palestine in the days of Jesus' birth. They would not have lived in anything that would have had carved ornate furniture. But one reason I like this window is that the eyes seem to follow you around the room. I think the interesting look that Mary has on her face is one of protective shielding of her child. She's looking at you in a sort of a way that one would think, I'm keeping my eyes on you, you're not going to harm my child. Whereas Christ is looking totally childlike, open, sincere, not afraid of anything. One, you'll see below the cross is a veil. Behind that veil is what we call the Tabernacle. So Holy Eucharist is our primary service every week, and the consecrated elements are kept on reserve here. So if you come in and see a veil on that means that behind there in the tabernacle would be consecrated bread and wine. Also, to signify that the consecrated elements are present is what is called a present light or sanctuary light, which is the red candle you see burning to the left. This also indicates that the consecrated elements are present. Now, in the 250th anniversary of the church, it was decided to spruce the place up a bit. By then, the walls were kind of a dingy off-white, so they decided to go down through layers of paint to try to find out the original colors. So I'm not sure on the video if you can see the colors very well, but the walls in the building are two shades of a kind of an interesting green. Those are the original colors from the plaster that was put in 1828. Now, a very interesting thing happened up here, though. As they went down through this portion to find the original color, lo and behold, they found what you are seeing. No one even knew it existed. This is what it would be called faux painting. In other words, it's painted to look like blocks of limestone or blocks of some sort of stone, but it isn't. Instead, it's just plaster that has been painted and shaded to give that appearance. No one even knew it existed until, once again, they started removing layer after layer after layer of paint. So apparently that was done in the 1882 edition of the sanctuary. Well, it was such a cool thing to find out that we called in a husband and wife team. I think they were from Massachusetts, and they restore faux painting. So they were able to see enough of it for the color, enough of the detail, that they were able to take it back to the original look. So that was quite a pleasant surprise. It's been a beautiful addition, we think, to the sanctuary. Now, just 4 or 5 years ago, when we added the new organ, the choir was shifted up a level, and the altar was pulled away from the reredos. So the priest can either celebrate facing the congregation or facing the reredos. What was interesting then is it exposed the original wall behind the altar table. And lo and behold, here was remnants of the faux painting, but also the ghost outline of the original altar that was placed against that wall. Really kind of interesting to open that up, and here was this ghost outline on the wall of the original altar. One never knows what one might discover when you go into nooks and crannies of a very, very old building. Now, one interesting treasure that we have is a connection to the President of the Confederacy and his wife, Jefferson Davis, and his wife, Verena. Mrs. Davis wrote, "The parishioners of St. Lazarus Church of Memphis, Tennessee, raised a subscription to purchase a communion service for their use. As it pleased Almighty God to permit the beloved parish to be blotted out, these humble worshipers to be scattered, and the church to be used for other purposes, those who raised the fund desire to present to St. Luke's, Salisbury, North Carolina, this service in memorial of our tender, gentle, learned, and eloquent pastor, the Reverend Dr. John Thomas Wheat. So long connected with St. Lazarus Church and bound to those of his scattered flock who remain alive by the tenderest ties of sympathy, affection, and profound respect. Verena Howell Davis and others. So we're now standing in the chapel. Originally, this was a freestanding building and was referred to as the chapter house of the Daughters of the King. The Daughters of the King was an Episcopal organization of women which still exists today. Later, it was also used as a parish house. It was also used as a Sunday school room. Then eventually, a section of the building was added that would connect through this door, the chapel, to a suite of offices, and then to the main church building. It was built in 1895. It's been restored since then, and it's been named after the Daughters of the King. Now, the stained glass windows in here are from the 1960s. They are from England, and they're rather interesting in that, for instance, the one up above, you'll see the all-seeing eye of God looking down. Then the window above the door, you will see creation. Makes sense? Then you will see Old Testament lessons, Moses, Noah, etc. Then we come over to the kingdom of God. God is at hand. Christ's life. This is my blood of the new covenant. And then finally, ye shall be my witnesses. St. Thomas Cranmer, who was the writer of the first Book of Common Prayer, who unfortunately Bloody Queen Mary burned at the stake, but he's considered a hero in the Anglican Church. And St. Augustine of Canterbury, and then finally Bishop John Stark Ravenscroft, who was the first bishop of North Carolina. And then an interesting depiction of the St. Luke's bell tower with a young crucifer carrying a cross, leading members of our congregation out into the world. On this wall, you'll see a Russian icon. St. Luke's has a foundation which is well funded and which does incredible work all around the world. We have helped to build churches, we have helped to build schools, orphanages, etc. And the foundation still is at that. One of the things that we did was to help rebuild a Russian church after the fall of communism. And as a gift, that church gifted St. Luke's with two icons. This is one of those, another is in the sanctuary itself. St. Luke's has always been somewhat of a restless congregation. It has always worked hard to be good members of the community and to do ministry that was needed locally, but ever so often it re-examines what it is doing and what it could be doing differently. A few years back, for instance, we decided to explore the concept of becoming the beloved community. And part of that, we decided to look at our neighbors and whether there was something we could or should be doing for our neighbors. So, here in Salisbury, where St. Luke's is located, directly beside of us is the Sheriff's Department and the jail. Directly behind us is the County Courthouse. Across the street is the Police Department, and we're surrounded by lawyers' offices. So obviously, the issue of law enforcement was something we felt like we needed to be concerned with. So we've examined several different possibilities, but one program we did develop is what is called Tranquility Place. Tranquility Place is a concept and an actual place. We've taken a suite of offices that join the main church building to the chapel, and that includes an entry hall, a library, a men's restroom, women's restroom, and also this room that I'm sitting in, which we call the hospitality room. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the local law enforcement, first responders have access to this area to come and rest, to come and meet, to come and have their lunch or their dinner, or just simply a quiet, nice place to sit and relax. And we are finding more and more that it is being used. They have access through a keypad, so once again, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We stock this room with snacks. They can recharge their telephones. There are soft drinks, coffee, etc. And so it is a calm, nourishing, pleasant place for our police officers, firemen, sheriff's deputies, first responders of all types to come for some peace and quiet and some sustenance. And we are very pleased to be providing this for these wonderful people who put their lives on the line for us every day of the week.